Hi.
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 Hello.
I'm curious about...
I'm curious about building open, authentic, loving relationship.
I'm curious about jealousy.
I'm curious about polyamory.
Does it just mean that you're fucking all the time?
How can I tell my parents that my partner is already married?
I'm curious about...
How do you know when you're too busy to have another relationship?
I'm curious about dominant and subordinate relationships.
I'm curious about sexual health.
How can relationships evolve with people as they grow and change?
And then there's the process of going through the reintroduction of saying, I am now this. You thought I was this and I'm this, and I'm still a little bit of that, but I'm also this thing too. And being open to going through that process again and again and again over the course of your life, because we continue to evolve.
Welcome to the Curious Folks podcast. For those challenging the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. My name is Effy Blue.
And I'm Jacqueline Misla. And on this episode, we are celebrating the start to Pride Month. And we're going to talk about our connection to the queer alphabet.
Totally. It is a wonderful month of beginning of spring. And in New York City, you can kind of tell. We go from warm, hot, scorching days to rainy, cold days, typical of spring. And it's a great month because there are celebrations and color and flags all around the city with a ton of events. And
we get very colorful.
Yes, I love that. It's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite months of New York.
We have a huge flag that's like adorning our window now. It's so like everyone can see, you'll start to see colors everywhere. Of course, there's the marketing of it. And so all the Targets and Old Navies have all of the colored rainbowed outfits. But yes, very colorful New York emerges.
Yes. There is definitely a little bit of what they call rainbow washing, which is the same as like greenwashing. It's like you're using some of these like identity or current topics for your own marketing needs. So, just like maybe not buy all the rainbow things from all the places, but think about like the ethics of the brand and the, maybe go for local shops or even better, queer-owned shops. If you really want to celebrate, Pride, if you really want to be an ally, or if you're, if you're in the queer community, spend your money with queer folk.
Yes.
Not just big corporates who have rainbow things to sell. So that would be my little 2 cents of, think about where your money goes.
We'll highlight some folks on our Instagram this month that people can shop with.
Yes. So my first notable experience in New York City when I moved here a decade ago was Pride.
What an introduction.
Right? Right? Because I arrived...
Welcome!
We're celebrating you! Like, yay! That would have been cute. But no, well, I arrived in New York City in 2010. I celebrated my birthday, my 30th birthday, and then we plunged into a snowy, cold New York winter where I spent most of my time trying to wrap my head around my corporate job at the time, a new city, trying to get the office set up and everything else. And then as sort of the winter passed and I got settled and spring was here, I managed to make some friends. And one of them, a dear, dear friend of mine, his name is Patrick. He's still a great friend of mine, somebody I care deeply, invited me to march at Pride with his church. So the church that I got to march with is St. Francis Xavier's. The priests are all Jesuits, and they feed 1,000 homeless every Sunday in the basement hall for many, many, many years. And a good friend of mine been attending there for years. Super LGBTQI friendly, really, really nice folk. I got to meet them. I'm not religious in any way, shape, size, or form. We talked about this a lot in previous episodes. Such a wonderfully contrast experience to be marching at a Pride march with a church. At the time, I knew what Pride was, but I hadn't seen the Pride celebrations that happens in the city. I knew what it was. I've seen it on TV. I just hadn't fathomed the size, the extent, the joy, the exuberance, the diversity the sheer mass of people that Pride brings out.
Mhm.
And at the time, I wasn't where I am here today. I was what I call a seeker, which a lot of our listeners are. I was a seeker. I knew that what I had looked good for me, but didn't feel good for me. I was struggling with my identity. I was struggling with my lifestyle. I was ticking all the mainstream boxes, but wasn't feeling great. And I was just like so focused on work. That's all I would think about. That's all I would do. I had really identified with the job that I was doing. And Pride was that moment for me that I saw a glimpse of something that I was seeking. It wasn't like clear vision. I didn't have this like epiphany, but I was like, oh, okay. Like there are masses of people here who are making different lifestyle choices. They are stepping away from the status quo and they are living their best lives and they're celebrating. And there's something here that maybe I don't need to cling so hard to what I know is like right, in air quotes. So it was definitely like a moment to mark. And that was the Pride March of 2011 that made me decide that I should stay in the city and check it out for a while.
Yeah, I mean, if that was you're like, welcome into New York. What a beautiful welcome.
Yes, I felt welcome.
So call to action. If you haven't been to Pride in New York and you now can travel and feel safe traveling post-COVID, join us. Come. Don't come this year because it's not all live and in person this year. It's like hybrid. But next year, you should definitely come and invite us. I want to go to your Pride marches. Invite us to your Pride marches wherever they are. And Effy and I will make a tour. I will go. Invite me and I will make it there.
For next year, if we get invited, if we went on a Pride March crawl around the country, let's put this in our vision board.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful. I would love it. I've been going to Pride. I grew up in New York City, been going to Pride March for almost 2 decades. And I would go every year as an ally to be a part of the energy and the experience of the music and the color and to infuriate and to celebrate amongst the thousands of other folks who congregated across Manhattan in everything from jeans to G-strings. And I remember the heartbreak that it felt like in our collective chests after the murders of gay and lesbian and trans citizens and advocates. I remember the electricity that was in the air after gay marriage became a federal right. Yeah, I would go with friends. I went with my ex-husband. We went with my daughter and Pride March. So Pride March was not new for me until it was. I was in my early 30s in my first same-sex relationship with my now wife. And suddenly it felt like the colors of the rainbow in the flag represented me. And the rebellion at Stonewall meant that now I could walk in that parade holding her hand. I've attended the march and the parade ever since and have marched in it. And well, until COVID hit, but with the growing awareness that it felt like I was late to the party, like late to the struggle. And I know I'm not the only one. I know for those of us who are late to lesbian, delayed to gay, tardy to trans, we may feel like we have a lot to learn. And of course, I'm joking, right? Because whenever with any of us, our truth aligns with who we are, that is the right time. And sometimes those of us who came out later in life, we feel like we are at a disadvantage for entering into this awareness, in this courage, in this exploration, in this truth later in life.
Yeah. People often talk about the coming out process when you're a kid, right? You're a kid, you're a teenager, maybe in your 20s. But when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, I've heard, people talk about coming out to their parents and what about coming out to their kids. So coming out can come in all different shapes and sizes. And I think there are pros and cons for each age group, right? So I think when you're coming out younger, and depending on, of course, what kind of family you're coming out to, right? If you know that your parents are just going to be supportive to you, that's beautiful, right? Coming out young to a beautiful, supportive family and like really feeling into your identity and making friends and finding community and feeling fully self-expressed, right? All those things would be your ideal situation. But I think it can also be super dangerous, right? If you don't have that, if you don't have a supportive community and family when you're young, knowing that you can't take care of yourself, that you're going to be kicked out or stranded and all those things. So it can be really hard coming out at a young age versus when you come out older. I think, yes, some people do feel like they missed out, like they weren't a part of the sort of the bigger cohort, the bigger community for a long time. They may feel like they have a lot of catching up to do, or they missed out on things. At the same time, I feel like you're coming out from a safer place, right? You're sort of established within yourself. You don't really need anyone to approve of you. That is directly linked to your sense of safety and security. It's interesting. I think coming out is hard in general. I think both sides, whether you're older or younger, have their own challenges.
You know, in the work that I do with folks, particularly around like in the career space, there's this idea of going from expert to novice. And so when folks are going through career transitions and they've been in a particular career for a long time, they're an expert in that space and they're like, now I want to do something creative. Now I want to do something different. The hardest leap is to then be a novice. And that is what my experience felt like coming out in my 30s. Was I knew how to be a straight wife and mother, and like now learning how to navigate, you know, the queer space. Like I remember there were times I had to ask for glossary moments. I was like, what does a U-Haul mean? And what's a pillow princess? And what's a switch? And there were times that I would say something and my sister, who is queer, would laugh and be like, that is such a heteronormative thing to say. And there was and still like a lot of social conditioning that I needed to unpack and unlearn. And it was interesting because I helped my sister, my brother and I helped my sister with her coming out process when she was in her early 20s and, you know, helped her tell my parents and helped her kind of allow herself to be in her truth. And yet when it was my time, I don't know, 10 years later, it took me months to tell my parents. And I was a grown ass adult with a child, right? Like to your point, I was established in who I was, but that is the challenge, right? The challenge was that I was an adult and that people expect me and adults to be fully formed and somewhat predictable. And now I was introducing a new part of myself. And I think that sometimes that's the delay in coming out is because you could not feel like it was possible to share your truth or frankly, even recognize your truth when you were younger because of your home, because of your religion, because of the times.
Also, maybe because it's not so clear to you, right? We think of sexuality to be such a clean cut. People feel straight, people feel gay. I feel like it's not. So, I mean, the Kinsey scale is the Kinsey scale for a reason, right? It's a scale. And I feel like if you're not clearly on one side, that could also be a reason why you just don't come out till later because you're like, well, you know, like, I like the opposite sex. You know, my broader culture tells me that's okay. And I don't necessarily dislike, you know, my opposite sex. So why look even further? I think we just need to recognize that for some people, it's just not that clear cut.
Yeah. For those who identify, like myself included, as bi or pan, where you could be attracted also to the opposite sex, then it could be easier to stay engaged with the opposite sex if you feel like there's resistance in order to have same-sex relationships. And so that could be true. Or again, it's just, to your point, it could not feel safe. I mean, we didn't have the same LGBTQ AI role models when I was young. I mean, there was no queer alphabet. That did not exist when I was young. So those letters had no meaning when I was growing up. And so it was challenging for me to even vision that out. Like I knew I was attracted to girls, but girls are beautiful. So why wouldn't I be? But did that mean I wanted to be in a relationship with them? That I wanted to have sex with them? Like that came later in life.
Sure. I also think that, I mean, I remember LGBT. Those days it was LGBT, the QAI plus weren't a part of it, but it was mostly for warnings, right? I mean, I remember learning about LGBT as a part of the HIV crisis. So it was always like warnings and something going wrong within the community. It was never, I didn't learn of it as something that you celebrate or an identity. It was more like warning or something wrong, crisis, you know?
Yes. And even, I mean, the origins of Pride are not necessarily around celebration. They're around struggle and rebellion and fight to just exist. And, that has evolved into also being proud of who we are in parallel to fighting for our right to exist. But to your point, it was really around struggle and strife. I mean, I have the same issues when I was growing up related to my ethnicity. Like being Hispanic, particularly in New York City at that time, felt like I was supposed to, be at a certain socioeconomic status and certain schools and certain neighborhoods. And like the world had prescribed out to me, oh, you're Hispanic. Like, that's too bad. You're not going to be as successful. And so that was a part of myself too, that I was like, oh no, like, so this part of me is bad. And I'm a woman and that's bad. And I'm young and that's bad. And I like girls and that's bad. Like there were so many things that I, was fighting against. And if those who've listened know my story, right? I spent 30 plus years playing by all the rules. And then something switched in me. I was like, I can't do it anymore. And so then I had to unravel all of those things in my 30s, which was great. To your point, I had a job then. I didn't live with my parents. Like there were certain things, but it was also really challenging because people thought that they knew me. I thought that I knew me.
Right. I think that's the thing, right? I don't know. I haven't really had a clear coming out of anything where I sort of sat my parents down, sat anybody down and said, here's my identity. So I don't know. I feel like for me, it's an ever evolving, ever growing thing. I feel like my identity is like ever growing, ever changing. And because of the type of relationship I have with my parents, that I left so young and I was boarding school and then left. And like, I haven't really had a connection, like a connection with my parents as I was 13. So, and because I've always done things that challenge the status quo, they I think they've stopped expecting the conventional things. So I don't feel like I've ever had to come out. But I think along the way, like coming out to myself was really hard. Like realizing that I don't want to be in a corporate world, that I want to come out of that cookie cutter world, or that I'm not so straight, and we're going to talk about that. But like, what does that really mean? And all that kind of stuff is, I think coming out to yourself is harder maybe when you're older, because like you said, you've been a certain way for such a long time that you've kind of feel like that's it now. Like that's who you are, and you can't really change that. I'm curious, knowing that you were safe and then you are independent and interdependent and had a support network and were an adult and you had a career and you had a kid and all that kind of stuff. What was in the way of you coming out to your parents? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was rooted in fear. They're not going to love me anymore. We're not going to have the same rapport anymore. We're not going to have the same relationship. They're going to see me differently now. They, I came from a religious background. They are going to fear that my soul will be damned to hell. And I don't want my parents to feel that sense of fear for me. And just what does that mean? Because that also meant the devolution of my marriage. So I was married to my ex-husband, and we had separated, and I had moved with my daughter to Manhattan, and we were living on our own, except we weren't really. My wife was living with us at the time. And so we were living together for like a year. I mean, certainly we weren't married yet, but we were living together for about a year before I told my parents. And so my mom would come by or my dad would come visit, and I would be like, yeah, you got to go somewhere else tonight, because they didn't know. And I was like, at some point I'm going to tell them, but I felt like I was like 14 or 15. And it was really rooted in, and I think there's other things there. I think my family, there's my father who shares everything, like, his emotions are on his sleeves and it feels like too much. And there's my mother who shares nothing, and you don't know anything about her. And so those were my two role models: say nothing at all, keep everything private and in the closet, or share everything and overexpose. And so I didn't really know where the middle ground in that was. And I think actually what was interesting for me too is I think that my transition was my coming out was both confusing and maybe more digestible, because I was attracted to androgynous women, which, my wife is pretty androgynous looking. And so, I've said that my relationship with androgynous women was like my gateway to bi and pansexual, gay, A-Y-T-E-Y-A. But
Your gateway?
My gateway. But it did feel like this is a smooth kind of like, stepping stone to it. But I think that also made it more confusing, because it was like, all right, well, she kind of looks like a man. Like, why wouldn't you just be with a man? And of course,
That's very
I have to
heteronormative
explain. Right.
thinking.
I was going to say there's so much that makes, her different. But what I realized also, and this was also true for me from the very beginning, it actually wasn't about her being a woman or a man or anything like that. I mean, I identify as pansexual in that it is really the person and my connection to that person, regardless of the gender identity and their body, body shape and size and type that I'm attracted to.
Oh, I thought you were into cookware.
I do love a pansexual person who can cook too, and some nice pans.
No,
But
yes, I'll do that. Thank you.
But I think that made it harder. I do think that made it harder. But that was it. I think that there was fear there. And I also, you've heard me talk about change before. And I think that self-change goes through kind of 3 different phases. And I certainly did as well. The first phase is letting go of the external expectations that define who you should be. And that takes a lot of, again, religious unpacking, social unpacking, familial unpacking, just to let go of those expectations. Then there's navigating through the fear and the doubt that convinces us that we will fail, that we will be alone, that we will be unlovable if we reveal who we really are. And then there's the process of going through the reintroduction of saying, I am now this. You thought I was this and I'm this, and I'm still a little bit of that, but I'm also this thing too. And being open to going through that process again and again and again over the course of your life, because we continue to evolve.
As we were preparing for this podcast, one of the things that we were talking about is imagine a world where coming out isn't a thing, right? That the coming out process is there because there is an assumption of what is, and therefore you have to come up against.
Mm-hmm. You have to make an announcement to say, I am not that.
Exactly. So it's like, we assume, we joke about it. It's like coming out as straight. Like, what would it be like if you had to announce that you're straight? Straight people don't have to announce that they're straight because there's an assumption. If you're not straight, you have to come out. I mean, what if we lived in a world that wasn't such a thing, that there wasn't this one moment. 1, you have to make a decision. 2, you have to sit some people down that love you, that, that is a big part of your bigger identity, bigger community, and tell them what decision that you've made. And then go out there and execute and stay within that framework, where that's not how we were set up. But that when you were ready to explore relationships and love and connections, when the right person came along, you explored what was available. And when you wanted to introduce somebody to your parents or whomever you wanted to sort of introduce them to, make them a bigger part of your life, that's when you introduce people. And that there wasn't this preliminary conversation around who you were attracted to that you have to sort of put into words beforehand, right?
Yeah. I think we can get there.
I think honestly, the Gen Zs are
right. Exactly. I was just going to say, the kids nowadays, I do. I look at, what my daughter's looking at it, on TikTok, or her role models, or, Jojo Siwa, who's like, I'm this and that. And when Ellen came out, it was a huge deal. And now, Demi Lovato and their pronouns, and Jojo Siwa and their sexual orientation. And all of these, I think that there are now very public, more youthful role models that are making that reality that you have described more possible. Not everywhere in the country. I want to recognize that we are on the coast of, the United States. And I know that many of our listeners are not in the United States. So this will vary based on the community that you're in.
Folks in Europe are like, we're over this. What are you talking
You Americans continue to talk about these identity politics. But so I think that that's possible. But what kind of world would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That I feel like that's worth exploring. I can hear among our audience who I know are going, I'm assuming, making an assumption, that they're going, no. We must recognize the queer alphabet. We must name being, whatever your sexual orientation is, because that's important for things like resource allocation and policy and protection and all the things that the LGBTQ community need. Yes, I think recognition means then you're allocated things and you are considered in law and all that kind of stuff. So yes, and coming out is really important. It normalizes these choices. So yes to all of that. 100% agree that I don't think we should just erase everything and not make it a thing. So I want to just recognize that on one hand. And on the other hand, I want to dream of this world where we don't even need to do that anymore. That we really do recognize individuals as individuals, and we don't need to have laws to protect them because it is what it is. Like that, it becomes the status quo. and then we can challenge it. But that I want to, like, I'm definitely dreaming of this world, this idealized world where you just like introduce the person that you love or the people that you love to the other people that you love, and life goes on, love goes on. That's my Pollyanna-ish dreaming of the world.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I mean, you and I talk often about like the change that's possible. And I wouldn't say I'm more pessimistic. I would say I study change management and I was a community organizer in school. Yeah, exactly. I think that it's like, yes, generations and generations from now, maybe we're going to get there. I think in between, there's still struggle, there's still dialogue, there's still representation, there's still celebration. I think you are much more optimistic around the timeline of when we're going to get there than I am.
I don't know. I hang out with your kid and I'm like, oh, one generation, like by the time she's like her generation is in power, I feel like we'll be there. That's what, yeah.
I'm hopeful. There's, systemic prejudice is really embedded in there. So like there's one thing about creating some social norm shifts, but really creating systematic change, I think is going to take much longer. And to your point around identity, I think I've gone through bunch of different labels over the course of, I think it was, bisexual and pansexual. And I've shared in a soapbox moment that at some point I stopped saying pansexual because I would get too many questions or too much challenge. Like, do you then sleep with this person and that person? And it's like, oh, too many questions. So now I've landed in queer. I was resistant to queer for a long time. When I was growing up, queer was not a positive term that didn't feel comfortable for me. But now I feel like that best represents, because essentially it's like not straight. It just boxes me into, or like frees me up, I should say, from the box. And then I don't have to define anything else.
So you've landed on queer. Yeah. I continue to remain in the air. I don't know. I feel like I should be landing in queer. I have a resistance, right? We talk about this often. I do have a resistance to identifying as queer because I'm not straight. When people do ask me, my, nifty, funny quib of an answer is, people ask me what my sexual orientation is. I'll say particular. Because that is the truth. Like, I am particular. I am particular. But I think it's also because in my head, this is the story or the belief that I hold. I think to be queer isn't just about being not straight. I know people who are not straight, but I don't necessarily think they don't identify as queer. And I think that queerness is a political statement as well as a sexual orientation, sexual identity. That's kind of, I think, where I find myself thinking and as I read and I explore and I kind of keep an eye on, an ear out for those things, I'm finding that queerness has a political expression, if you will. And I sometimes struggle to align with the politics of queerness, not the sexiness of queerness, right? So it's not really, I think that's where I struggle with queer. And then anything else just kind of feels not enough. Right? Because I like how queerness is beyond just who you sleep with, but also who you align with, maybe. And I feel like, sure, who I sleep with kind of matches with the queerness. Who I align with, I don't know, like maybe like 90%. I'm still like 10% questioning things, not quite aligned. I'm not settled on identity politics, not settled on pronouns. I'm not settled on the trans experience. So yeah, I feel like queerness is just, I don't know, I'm not ready. I don't feel like fully aligned, fully informed, fully made my mind up about the politics and the sort of the ethics of it, I think.
Yeah, I get that. It makes sense to me because I think I am fully aligned in that space. So I think that's why it does feel like exactly, I can adorn that, because I think the work that I do outside of Curious Fox, and I think the way that I, the way that I vote, the things that I do align with that space. And so that makes sense. And I think that what we're talking about is interesting because these are conversations that you have to have once that becomes a choice, right? Once one decides to step out of the status quo of being straight or cis or even married or monogamous, right? And taking that step out of the prescription, then you have the freedom and more autonomy to determine what makes sense for you and for your relationships. And then you have to ask yourselves those questions. What do I think about this? What should I be called? Who am I attracted to? What am I going to put on my Bumble, my OkCupid profile? Like which box am I going to tick? And that's beautiful that there's so much choice now, right? That there's not like default and prescription, but there's also a lot of like self-inquiry that needs to happen.
Sure.
And that again can feel really overwhelming when you're supposed to be established. When you're older, when you're a professional, when you have a family, that now you're going through this thought process and you want to share this out with other folks. I mean, part of what I want to say to folks is, hey, this is how I am. This is who I am today. Like, come back and talk to me in a year from now. Like, the point is I don't want to be put into a prescription or a default or a conveyor belt anymore. And so then that means that I may shift in the things that I choose to do and the way I choose to self-express.
Do you feel like the queerness label gives you that freedom? Do you feel like it gives you that enough of an ambiguity, which this is essentially what it is. This is what I'm hearing anyway. And I feel exact the same way. So it's like, what is a label that is clear enough so that people land, people kind of know what you're talking about, right? You're not sort of saying, hi, I am a purple lemon, right? Because then people were like, are we talking about vegetables, right? You kind of want to, you want to get on the same page. So what is the label that you use that gets people on the same page as you? And then at the same time, it's ambiguous enough that it gives you a broad range of expression, movement, change, room for evolution, and kind of freedom, if you will. I think that's essentially what you're trying to shoot for. And that's definitely what I'm trying to shoot for.
Yes. And that's me very specifically, right? So when I think about my wife or my partner, they're like, they're lesbian. Like that's the bucket that they fall. When I think about, my sister.
Those people who know.
I know, that sense of clarity. Well, but in each way though, I think each way feels freeing. For me, at least, it feels like to know definitively, this is my bucket. This is my community. This is like, there's something that feels incredibly comforting in that. And I think those of us who have stepped out of the prescription of being, heterosexual or cisgender, or like you're walking away from a cocoon in some way of norms that exist and not having to explain yourself and things like that. And then that opens you up though to a world of possibility. And so there's a part of myself that does kind of covet and long for that real clarity of like, this is the type of person that I like. But then I also love not having to choose. But that's my personality. I'm an and not or kind of person. I want all my options always available to me. Yeah. And so, my preference is not to have any box at all. And again, if talking about those three phases, first I had to go through the realizing that the expectation of the world is that I choose. And that who I was not about choosing a particular path. Then I had to fight that internal fear and doubt that like, what the hell's going to happen to me? Was someone going to love somebody who's that wild? Who's that free and also super like straight-laced because I'm like the most conservative wild person that you will, right? Like in my work I'm like the super most corporate person that you'll meet, and also just wild and free.
By the way, if you want to see the wild and free Jackie, just check out the most recent live on the Curious Fox Instagram, and you can see. Don't listen to a word she says. She's the wild of them all.
They're pockets. But even to your point, that like I want to be able to on one Instagram live, I want to be silly and salsa dancing on a rooftop in Brooklyn. And then next, I want to have a really serious and deep conversation with the folks who are tuning in about navigating through change and difficulty. Like I want all the things. I want all of those dimensions. And for me, queerness allows me to do all of that, is to say, I get to choose any of the letters and any of the things, but it also means a responsibility for me to learn about all those things. Like, I think that was one of the pieces in coming out later, is you are not just taking on this identity because this is who you are, but there is an entire history. There are LGBTQAI ancestors that have, and advocates that have allowed us to live in certain ways and to express ourselves in certain ways. And so like there's a reverence to that history that you have to take on and appreciate. So there's a lot of learning. And then all the terms, there's so many terms. So many terms.
Yeah. I think the label is also helpful because I think the labeling or picking your label is actually an effort to belong, right? I think the part that I find the hardest of not picking my label, not saying, yes, I'm queer, is then I don't really know where I belong, right? I mean, and I can look at it in both ways. I can look at it in a way that I belong everywhere because I don't belong in one place, or I can say I don't belong anywhere because I haven't quite aligned myself with anyone. And I think as I look at these identity politics across what's happening right now, I see two things. I see an effort to individuate. So people are like bombarding themselves, like all the post-its. Like I imagine, in my mind's eye, I see people like walking around with like covered in post-its with like labels on them. And I think that's an effort to both individuate and belong at the same time. I think there's like this effort to be like, I want to be different. I want to be, I want to be recognized as my fully self-expressed self. I want to be seen. I want to be heard with all the nuances and all these like decisions that I've made. And I want to belong. I want to be a part of this community and this community and this community. I think those are like, and when I think of like not landing on my identity, is what you're saying. Like, I don't get to have ancestors and history. And at the same time, I also don't feel boxed into things, So yeah, it's up in the air. For me, it's up in the air. Yeah. And I think, like I said, it's just boils down to politics, like I just haven't landed on certain topics.
Yeah. Well, I think this highlights it's a little bit of a choose your own adventure, right? You get to decide. I mean, I know that you've talked to me about your very good friend who also came out in his 30s and similar story to me, right? Professional, established, right? Yeah. And then chose to then define himself and talk to his family about it. And I know you said that was a difficult experience for him.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy because he's, like you said, so first of all, he's a white gay man, which actually is very close to the top of the food chain, right? He's a passing, good looking white gay man who's established in his career, a popular, great guy, very, very close friend of mine, also a collaborator of mine. Yeah. I mean, he came out, I think when he was like 30, it wasn't like there was a big sort of pushback from his family, and then he just like went back into his closet. And then I should say he started to explore living as a gay man in New York, by the way, which I think, when you talk to him about it, he'll say like New York saved my life because it gave him the space to be who he is. And it's one of the things that the city does. But yeah, I mean, he came out again when he's 35 to his mom and to his brother. And it was like, it was like hanging out with a teenager, like it was stressful. And I think what I did notice, though, which is what I was saying at the beginning, is that he said he was in a place now where if his family didn't accept him, he knew that he was in a good place, that he could carry on. It would be sad. He would mourn any kind of loss or any kind of deterioration of connection. But he was like, I am my own person now. And I have, I'm free, and I have, I can afford my life. I can take care of myself. I have friends. I have community. I have a career. Like, I would love my parents to be on board. I would love my family to be on board and celebrate me and all that kind of stuff. But if they don't, that's not on me. That's on them. If they want to keep a connection with me, I'm open and willing and want to do all the work. If they don't, that's on them. Which, that's the privilege of coming out later in life.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. That you hopefully at that point have built out a little bit more establishment, a little bit more community. I think that what I hear from that story is similar to what I've heard from folks that I've worked with who at some point you come to the point where you realize, I don't want to waste any more time not being authentic to who I am. And I don't want to have regrets. I don't want to live 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 more years in a way that is not aligned with my truth and then have regrets. And so you come to a decision point where the fear of not changing overrides the fear of what's going to happen if you lose everything you have because of that change. That you realize for yourself, if I stay in the life that I am, in the construct that I am, in the relationship that I am right now, the fear of not fulfilling who I am as an individual, that is actually more scary than if I lose everything. And so that moment is what I understand, from folks who I've talked to and worked with is the driving point. And it sounds like for him, he was like, I'm going to hope for the best.
Yes.
I'm going to hope for the best. And I have to do this for me.
Yes. And I'm not abandoning myself.
Right.
If you want to abandon me, great. But I'm not going to abandon myself. And I think that is such clarity of thought. And I think that is, I talk about this idea of abandoning yourself when we're talking about boundaries and relationships and everything else. But I feel like this is such a clear demonstration of you make that choice. Like you fear the other person abandoning you. And to avoid that, you abandon yourself. And I think ultimately we feel abandoned because we abandon ourselves. And I think when you make that decision, as hard as it is, to stick with yourself, to love yourself, to accept yourself, and to not abandon yourself for other people's sake, I think when you're thriving. It's hard, but that's when you're thriving.
Yeah. And be prepared. We can talk about a few things that you can do if you're coming out later in life. And I think one of them is to be prepared. Be prepared to answer some questions. Be prepared to do some explaining, because I think what happens is that folks know that the present is live, know that the future will be created, but have a sense that their past should be clear, right? The past is in the past. I know what happened. I've understand it. I've processed it. And to now know that there is a secret, what feels like a secret that has emerged, that you are something that I did not know that you were, creates family members and loved ones and partners to now question the past. And so they're going to have lots of questions. So be prepared to ask questions and to answer questions. And that can be hard because in the beginning, you may feel either really private about it or you may feel defensive because maybe you've just come to this realization and you feel now joyful about it. And their questions now make you feeling like you should be defending yourself.
Or you don't have the answers yet.
Right. Or you don't have the answers yet. So be prepared for that. Whether or not you have the answers, be prepared that there are going to be questions. Be prepared that maybe some folks will know already. And they were like, oh, I already knew, I could tell, this is only a secret to you. Know that you may lose some friends, but hopefully you're going to gain more once you have a sense of your community. And then I think part of the hardest part is actually once you go through that phase is now starting to seek out those relationships. Right? Like if you are now dating for the first time in this world in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and you have to go into dating apps and you have to go to now different types of clubs and bars and event, that's scary. Again, go from the expert to novice. We walked around in middle school with our trays in our hands looking for what cafeteria table to sit at. But when you're older, you think that you've moved past that. I don't now need to be in that awkward phase of looking for where to sit anymore. And yet, there you go. There you are coming out and having to date and then being like, what is it like to flirt with a man or a woman or trans folk? Or what does that feel like to do that for the first time? And the vulnerability of that, of really knowing that this is what you want and not knowing how to do it. That's scary as hell.
Sure. Also, let's just not be caught. Sex with the same sex person or a trans person, it's a whole new, it's like going back to novice. Yeah. So not just the dating part of it, but should you develop a physical relationship? I know that definitely was the thing for me. The physicality of it, I felt like I was, very nerdy and knew what I was doing on one side. And then I would just turn into a 12-year-old boy who's just fumbling around, just I have no idea what I'm doing. And that alone can get in the way of you exploring because it's just being an adult. It's okay being a teenager fumbling around. It's hard being an adult sex educator fumbling around. You lose your entire street cred, professional cred, and it's just not sexy. And you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm sorry. But so yes to everything that you're saying. Coming out late, you have to go back to those teenage awkward years. You have to figure out who to sit with, how to flirt, how to be on dating sites as a queer person, how to go on those first dates, how to have conversations with people that you're not used to dating and having sex with, and then actually having sex with them. That's a whole other ball game. So cut yourself lots of slack.
Yeah. Which is it. The next tip is like get involved in the community.
Yes,
You're gonna need help.
Yes,
you're gonna need support. You're gonna need help. You're gonna need people to ask questions to that have no judgments. That when you say something, as I did many a time, and sometimes still do, that is wildly heteronormative, that someone gently will be like, "Hey, yeah, no, that's not the thing we say. We're gonna say, you're gonna say this instead." But have that. I mean, I wrote an article. It's on our website called I think it's First Time Lesbian Experience, something like that. But essentially, when you are going to be with a woman for the first time and all of the fear that goes around that, like here's some tips and some steps to like navigate through that first experience. There's another article up there called "I'm Sorry My Truth Has Caused You Pain," which essentially again is preparing for the conversation and knowing that what you may say that is your truth, it may hurt somebody, and how do you prepare for that. So, but I share that to say there are two, those are just two resources that are on our website, but there are so many. I mean, there's the National Resource Center on LGBTQ aging, and we can put some links actually in the show notes of places where people can get some resources and some community, but find people that you trust and queer up your social media feeds. Find other folks where there's representation. I mean, Effy, you talk about this all the time, the need for permission and inspiration that we get when we see other people who are living their lives differently than us. And we're like, wait, that's a thing?
That's allowed.
That's allowed. Yeah. You can seek out stories from others who are coming out later in life. And then, you can be kind to yourself because you're going to hear about people's struggles and you're going to see their successes and you're going to see opportunities. But that comes from changing your noise. That comes from being engaged in another community. And then also seek out help if necessary, coaches and therapists. And these are big life changes. You do not have to do this on your own.
And I would add in there, get comfortable with the discomfort of it all. And at the top of that list, get comfortable with telling people this is new to you. Because I find that kind of honesty will allow people to choose, if they choose, to meet you where you're at, right? If you just tell people, listen, I'm just figuring this out, this and this happened, or like I just came to it, or I've been holding it down for so long. These are my first experiences. Yes. I think having that kind of honesty, that kind of vulnerability will allow people to meet you where you're at. Yes. And I hopefully support you and not judge you and all those things. And I would say seek community before you seek dating. Like, seek community before you seek romance. Let's put it that way. Because I think having the safety of a community, knowing your way around, will eventually, I think, will get you to get you to meet people that you want to date. But sometimes I think people just jump straight into dating and romance. I find same with becoming non-monogamous or opening up your relationship. Often people have someone in sight by the time they are thinking about non-monogamy, and it just changes the dynamics. I think if you are interested in all these different ways of living and loving, find community first. And I think with the support of a community, as you get lay of the land, the rest will follow.
Yes. Start off easy. Start off with social media. Start off maybe with the music that you're listening to. Like, start to find the places where you're spending your time and change the noises there.
Change your noise.
Yes. Then you can move to, what is the event that I'm going to go to? What is the book that I'm going to read? And start to just dip your toe in many waters. And know, again, this is the invitation for you. Here's the call to action is once you dip your toe outside of the prescription, once you say, actually, I'm not going to default to all of these things that has been prescribed to me, your world is open to you. Try all the things. Go for the buffet. Try this, try that. Eat a little more of this. Decide you're going to put that one back. Do it ethically. Do it with conversation. Do it responsibly. Do it consensually. But allow yourself at any age to just rediscover who you are.
Yes, continue to do it. Exactly. Continue to do it. I think I love, we've said this on the podcast before, I love that now adulting is a verb. I love that. I love that adulting is a verb and it's not some threshold that you cross and now you are fully formed and you know all your shit. You have your shit together. You know all the things. You know who you are and you're somehow operating in this an end form for decades. Like, you're a fully formed adult and then you're that thing for decades, right? It just makes no sense. Adulting is a verb.
Yes.
And life is a practice. I think those things are just so important. And to allow yourself to continue to check in with yourself, continue to explore, continue to try things. You don't have to change. You don't have to actually commit to anything. You don't have to promise anything to anyone. At the beginning of Curious Fox, we always said no promises, no commitments, just curiosity. I think what we're saying here is to just remain curious throughout your life, including your identity, including who you are, who you want to be, what you align with, what kind of inspiration crosses paths with you. Find permission to be fully self-expressed in a way that you're thriving.
Yes. All the things. Yeah. I mean, I joked, that there's late to lesbian, delayed to gay, tardy to trans, all that. But the truth is that whatever your truth is, that is right. Whatever your timing is, that is right. Whoever and however you choose to tell that truth, that is right. There is no timeline. There is no thing you're supposed to do. Just allow yourself, give yourself permission to continue to check in with yourself and tap into with yourself and say, how am I feeling? What do I want? What do I need from this world? What do I want to explore? And then begin to carve out some space little at a time to make that happen, right? You're hearing me now 10 years into my coming out and with my parents at 30 with a child, and being established in my career. And so I can say these things now, and I couldn't have said them as succinctly in the beginning. So just ease into it. You'll get there if that's your journey. And again, if you're looking for community, I have another invitation for you.
We have a community for you.
Curious Fox community. Yes, exactly. If you want to hear more of these conversations, I am actually, on behalf of Pride, we are doing a Pride social media takeover for Curious Fox, right? We are now going to lean very much into Pride this month. I'm super excited about it. We're going to have different folks take over our social media. And the first one is me. I'm going to take over for the first week. And so I'm going to do an Ask Me Anything. I am going to share out some more articles. I'm going to share out more about myself. I think that there's a version of me that's on this podcast, which is part of my truth. There's a version of me that you see in IG Lives, which is part of my truth. There's a version of me and I'm going to try to bring all of the different components of me and my full queerness to the Curious Fox page. So go onto Instagram, subscribe at We Are Curious Foxes.
It's like Transformers Jackie. I imagine like some Transformers Jackie with all these identities forming one giant Jackie.
Yeah,
that conquers the world.
Yes, exactly. Social justice advocate me, writer me, change management me, sexy me, mom me, all the things.
Hot mama. Yes.
If you want to see that transformation into whatever this transformer look of mine will be, join us on social media. We are curiousfoxes.com. You can also find us on Facebook. We have a page where you can get access to some of our articles and our podcast posts. And then we also have a group where there's some dialogue, there's some questions. To join the group, make sure that you answer the 3 questions that we ask you. If you've been waiting, if you signed up for the group and you're like, I haven't gotten in yet, it's probably because you didn't answer those questions. And we want to make sure that you do, because that ensures that you've read our guidelines and that you know what it's like to be a responsible member of that community. So do that. And then while you're on your phone, you know what I'm going to say next. If you haven't done it, then I'm going to ask you to do it right now in this moment. Subscribe to Apple, rate and review, follow us on Spotify or Stitcher. You're going to hear me say it each time. Every time you say it, you're going to feel a little bit guilty, maybe because you haven't done it. It's like when you hear your public radio ask for donations and you don't do it, but you listen to it anyway. One way to eliminate that guilt is just right now to go do it. Just subscribe, just share, just rate, and then you're done. And then you feel great about yourself. And every time you hear this message, you're like, she's not talking to me because I did it already. I'm part of the community.
Yeah.
And then if you want even extra for the most curious among us, then join our Patreon. That is where we share our extras, where we share podcast extras, where we share behind the scenes. We just did a bunch of behind the scenes for a photo shoot that we did this past weekend. That was a lot of fun. And so we're going to post some of those things onto our Patreon. And so you can support the community and be a part of the dialogue. We're going to start up doing some virtual events again, and you can be a part of those as a Patreon member. And then if you have things that you want us to explore this month during Pride or anytime afterwards, then we would love to hear from you. You can either email us or send us a voice memo at listening at wearecuriousfoxes.com, or you can record a question for us, which is even better because then we get to play that question on an upcoming show at 201-870-0063.
This episode is produced and edited by Nina Pollock, whose pride in her work makes us feel fully self-expressed on every episode. Our intro music is composed by Dave Saha. We are so grateful for their work. And we're grateful to you for listening. As always, stay curious, friends. Curious Fox Podcast is not and will never be the final word on any topic. We solely aim to encourage curiosity and provide a space for exploration through connection and story. We encourage you to listen with an open and curious mind, and we'll look forward to your feedback. Stay curious, friends.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.